Hello, everybody, and welcome to Innovative Journey Mapping Assignment as a precursor to the ePortfolio with Rachel Swinford, Mark Ertel, and then their colleagues Lisa Angermeyer and Stephen Fallowfield, who aren't able to join us yet, but may join us at some point. But I do want to hand it over to Rachel and Mark to get started.
All right, thank you so much. We are excited to be here with you for an hour-and-a-half workshop. So this is going to be a little bit focused on you. So we're going to be guiding you through a personal journey map towards the end of the session. So when it comes that time, it would be helpful to have pen and paper or computer, Word document, your phone notes, something to be able to take notes, and then start thinking about if you want to use pen and paper to draw your map, or if you want to use some type of technology such as Google Slides has some templates, and then Canva, if you're familiar with Canva, has nice templates as well. We will also be using a Google Jamboard throughout the session. So I put the link in the chat to the Jamboard, and I will actually share my screen on the Jamboard. To start, we want to find out what is your why for using ePortfolios. So before we even get started, the way you can do this is you can go over to the side, you can click sticky note, type in, what is your why? So personal growth for students, for example, then save it and it should pop up. Then you can drag it around wherever you would like. Are you able to get into the Jamboard? Hopefully I put the correct link. Looks like we have several people in there. All right, career mapping for students. Increase student agency and ownership of the learning process. Okay, giving students agency to tell their story and impact their community. It's a high impact practice, cultivates identity and sense of self and belonging, and connects the student experience across multiple areas, curricular, co-curricular, career. Love it. All right, keep those coming. I'm going to stop sharing that for a moment, and I'm going to actually add a document, if I'm able to do this correctly, of the journey mapping assignment that we use in first year seminar. Hopefully this works. So I believe to open it, you might have to download it to your computer first, but I've put the journey mapping instructor guide in the chat for you if you would like to download and take a look at that. So now go on. We'll talk a little bit about how we got to this assignment with that. So again, welcome. I'm Rachel Swinford. I'm faculty in kinesiology as my main role, and then I work as a faculty fellow, both with first year experience at IUPUI, as well as the ePortfolio alongside Debbie. And I'll let Mark introduce himself.
Sure. Hey, everybody. And let me echo and reiterate, Rachel is kind of a big deal here at IUPUI. We're proud of the work that she does within the school department and across campus. I chair the Department of Kinesiology. I've been part of this faculty team on ePortfolios since the beginning. Excited to be here.
I'll let you
yeah, so as you look at the screen, the only thing we mentioned to this, we're at IUPUI, soon to be IUI, and by the way, we are splitting from Purdue University, and that means for faculty life, that means almost everything and almost nothing. It sets a high level at the same time, which is kind of odd. It sets a high level element that's happening with whether we want it to or not, that we're going to do what we do. And one of the things that we're going to keep doing is work in the high impact practice space and the ePortfolios. It's also good to know who we are, because our location, the type of institute, the context, I think drives everything, because there are things that we might say and bring up and we find important that will not connect with you. Very similar when we hear things from individuals of different contexts, it really doesn't resonate with us, and it's not really talking point. I'll give you just a quick example to appreciate the context. In the past, I've heard repeatedly that people need to get buy-in from, vice presidents, vice provost to provost. That's not an issue for us. We do this at the department level. In fact, our dean could come to me tomorrow and say, those ePorts, I'm not a big fan of them. It'd be like, okay, and we would still do what we do and do it with high fidelity, because those things don't matter in the realm that we're in, where it could be a huge deal. So I want to acknowledge the context matters. So that's why I'd love in the chat to you question us or support us. And I hope that this is a free raise your hand. This should be highly interactive for where we are. So that's us. We're in downtown Indianapolis. Now for our department, because this is a department level initiative that we've started. And again, those of you that may know our story, we had a false start in 2016. We engaged in it, failed miserably, got a professional development, recast, restarted, and we are much more secure, confident, and comfortable with where we are because we've partnered with students. We've honored the diversity of our students and moved away from the one myopic lens of how ePortfolio should look to maybe more holistically with our context. So as you notice by the screen, we have a mission, we have a statement of culture, we have a curriculum. Regardless of what major you're in our department, you're going to get 9 of the high impact practices early and often. There are some that we just can't do. There's others that we do it well. I believe that, I'm not going to say that's unique. I think all of you do that, but that supports our ability to deliver an ePortfolio in a way because students can anchor it to learning in and out of the classroom. They can translate what they've heard in the classroom. And the reason we came together as a team, Lisa, Rachel, Steve, and I, the commonality we have, because we are different in our areas of expertise, the commonality we have is we were all promoted on excellence in teaching. So we value maybe new, novel, scholarly elements to the teaching and learning process. Not that other people don't, but we don't have research as our prime area of excellence. We don't have automatically service as our prime area, although we do lots of service there. So that's the reason I wanted to bring that up, is it may help you resonate with us and understand our story a little bit and our journey, no pun intended. Or you could say that we're a little bit different and maybe this is not quite, this doesn't make sense to us in that way, shape, or form. But kinesiology in a nutshell, before we transition on to science and study of human movement, can be expressed different ways. We as a department focus on pre-professional, professional training for students to work with individuals of all ages and all abilities. We work with early childhood, elementary age through older adult. And of all abilities, and we have a pretty pronounced work and expertise, Rachel being one, of working with adults, children, and students with disability. And to that end, I proudly boast this, that every time as a chair, in 2021, we won a national award for inclusive excellence. And that was as a direct reflection of the work that was cited with others, and Rachel and myself included. So we're excited to be here and to talk a little bit more about journey mapping.
All right, so what is journey mapping? I will say that journey mapping most often is used in a more of a business consumer journey mapping. So it's more on marketing, the planning type of side within business. However, it can be used in many different scenarios. So we've opted to use this as a reflective process where you can either look back or look ahead, or in some cases do both. A journey map is a visual representation of the journey that a person goes through over time throughout a set amount of time. So today's journey map is going to illustrate your past professional journey. So you're only going to be looking back today when we get to the personal journey mapping that we're going to do. So here on the bottom right, there is a QR code, and I'm not sure if anyone that's able to pull that up could also put a link in the chat in case you're not able to bring this up. But last fall, we created this ePortfolio to illustrate the journey that we've had with ePortfolios, and we were doing this to share at a conference, I believe the Assessment Institute. So what has our journey been? So I'll share this example journey map that was created actually just a month ago in preparation for a presentation that I did. So looking at our entire journey of using some type of e-portfolio in kinesiology starts over a decade ago using the EPDP in a first-year seminar, which stands for Electronic Personal Development Plan. So here you'll see in the map, it talks about what it was, and then underneath it is kind of the takeaway. The takeaway from that was we had major platform issues. We were using TaskStream. It was very cumbersome and confusing, both for faculty and students. It did not go well. The assignment itself was great, but the platform was really hard. We took a break from using e-portfolios within that course. And then in 2016, we received a grant. This is the one that Mark talked about a little bit. We focused solely on career, and we had a failed implementation. So much so that we wrote a paper basically that should be titled "What Not to Do, Learn from Our Mistakes." So that was our takeaway from that. So in 17, we took a hiatus, did professional development, had a very big aha moment. We were focused way too much on product and not enough on the process of creating the e-portfolio, a learning reflective e-portfolio. So we submitted a very different grant, relaunched in 18, and ever since have been pretty successful. In 2019, we realized we were doing a little bit of different types of reflections. Or no, that was our article that we published on that. It was 2020, where we talked about developing innovative reflections. So we have that article there. All of this is linked in that QR code if you follow that. We then realized that even though we were well into our implementation, we were still having problems with student buy-in. So we had the opportunity, we were sponsored by the university to participate, I believe, in the inaugural AAC&U Institute on e-portfolios. We were very fortunate to have Helen Chen as our mentor, and we worked with her to implement 2 different strategies to increase student buy-in. The first one being journey mapping, and the second one was including e-portfolios within academic advising. From that, we actually published in an ebook about our journey mapping. And then most recently, we I would say our team is very strong in SOTL, not just presenting at conferences like this, but also writing and sharing. So we'll have another publication coming out looking at our 6-year journey of our new implementation. So examples there for that. So with that, we've already answered the first question. So I'm going to stop sharing this and then bring that Jamboard back up.
And as you're doing that, if when we revisit it, thank you everybody for adding to that first page. We got some great additions. I was just kind of peeking at that as we were going through that, and I think that, and so I'm excited that we're going to save that and keep that, and just hear from other feedback, just to learn the perspective. And some of these resonate completely with us. I love a couple of them that related to helping students be reflective, reflect various perspectives, just become a reflective practitioner. So that was awesome. A lot of great stuff.
Awesome. Our second question at the top, now that I've made it smaller, I can't find it to flip there. If you click the arrow at the top, it will go to our second question. So now that you kind of know a little bit about what a journey map is, we showed you our example. What experiences do you have with journey mapping overall or in general? And then what piques your interest about journey mapping? So take a moment to answer that question. I've used this process for project documentation, but not portfolios. Great. No experience, but excited to do it and implement in my first year seminar. A similar idea with students, we do a career design canvas. Interesting. I want to hear more about that. First journey map was for the IGP. Institute on portfolios has emphasized our need to integrate EP related work scattered across our campus. Yeah, that's something that we're working on at IUPUI. It's kind of hard to tell what everybody's doing across campus. Interested in having student journey map to consider what should be included in their e-portfolio, but haven't figured out how to start. So I do that the senior year. I have students as they're finalizing their e-portfolio. They've been adding along the way, but not all courses are using the e-portfolio. So I walk students through an abbreviated journey map, which is really just kind of mapping out their journey at IUPUI, and see what's already in your ePortfolio from your map, and then what do you want to add here to kind of finalize your ePortfolio in the capstone. I presented a number of times on Journey so far with our ePort platform, but haven't mapped it on a page in a visual format. Awesome. Cool. All right. I'll stop sharing that. And we'll come back to that in a little bit.
Everyone keep entering thoughts. That was great to kind of see how they came across.
And I did that one.
Yep.
Okay.
So is Rachel had mentioned with our involvement, and again, a big kudos to the AAC&U Team Institute overall, and Helen Chen. When we got together to figure out this student buy-in and ownership, the ongoing challenge, we started kind of noodling over getting students started with it. We kind of felt like there needed to be a ePortfolio assignment, get them in the mindset of them to reflect, and what is reflection, how to reflect, how to ponder significant things. And and Rachel, I'm sure we'll touch upon that later. There are some things you have to be mindful of when you ask students, if you're not ready for some trauma-informed teaching practices, you really need to be. And we can even say that for ourselves. We need to appreciate that. But as we landed on a precursor assignment. How can students put pen to paper in a graphic display in a visual way that lets them to reflect back? Because remember, Rachel brought up a good point. In the consumer element, it's projecting forward for a consumer. What do they want? What is an obstacle? How to go around it? What's the best path? This is antithetical to that. This is taking a student and saying, how did you get here? What is your driving force? What were those landmark decisions or things that you remember that kind of funneled you one way? And the journey map, and instead of having them again, and I know people are big on this, and there's time and place, instead of it being that rating intensive, the natural way to honor diversity in our students is to express that. If you want to do it in words, great. If you want to do it in a picture, great. If you want to do it in a graph, great. There's not one way to do this. So I really think this was revolutionized our departmental skills in introducing it. Now, second along, concomitant with that, but that's not what today is about. We also wanted to include touch points that may not automatically be anchored in a class. And we also landed on including the advising team, having them check in with students as another form of accountability or a way to foster motivation in students, that everybody is wondering about this and supporting students' efforts. So that was the one thing that we really benefited from and gained from Helen and ourselves, and dedicated time that we had as a team, with a mentor, without a mentor, and really coming up with this novel to us pathway forward.
So I think Mark talked about a lot of this already as we kind of worked with our mentor throughout that year. It's a year-long process. And what's bolded and underlined here was our why. And that was your first question that we asked you today. What's your why? Because I think a lot of times when we ask questions about what we should change or what we should do with ePortfolios, you have to go back to, why are we doing ePortfolios? And for us, it's 100% the student to reflect and grow as a professional. Yes, they do end up with a product and an outcome that they oftentimes do share on their resume. We've seen for recommendation letters, which is phenomenal. And I've seen it even on Instagram. Students will share a link in their Instagram profile, or they'll, every time they update it, they'll do a little story with a link to it. So it's kind of cool to see those beyond our why. But our why, again, is really focused on the student becoming a reflective practitioner. So what better than this reflective experience of a journey map to then use as that precursor? We did do a reflection survey pre and post, and I can share that as well in the chat in a little bit later. Somebody reminds me about that. So what is the assignment? The assignment is currently now split into 2 class periods, 2 75-minute class periods. The first day we walk through part 1, and then the second day is when they're actually mapping everything. So we're going to walk you through this. So this is here for you. If you wanted to take a picture of this, I also put the instructor guide in the chat previously that you can download and save. But what's really nice about this is how the journey map can then be a nice segue into the ePortfolio. So part 1 of the journey mapping is representing the reflection on your experiences. And then part 2 is creating this artifact that then complements that reflection or experience that you had. So again, we're going to walk through these in detail as you make your own map. These are examples from the first year. So the first year we opted to actually do everything on pen and paper. So these were 2 examples from 2 different people in the class. And what you will see is that you have what it was. So this person says, my first honors class in elementary, tested out of classes at a young age. And what they took away from that was responsibility and discipline, and kind of their emotion that they tied to it was that they were proud. We have this person over here. They have their parents' divorce, their parents' relationship, and then they reflected rather than words, such as this person, in smiley faces. So you can see that that was a sad moment for that person. Then moving on to allowing students to use the technology, which we thought was, again, kind of nice because they're going to be using technology for ePortfolio. We still give the pen and paper option, and some do opt to use pen and paper. I like how this illustrates how different they can be. So this one, more abstract of a journey type thing. This one more of like a roadmap. So you can see this student starting back in 07, 08 was the earliest thing that this student put on hers. This was a specific honors journey map. So that's why it may not go back as far. All right. So what did we learn? So from a teaching standpoint, for me, this is my favorite activity that I do in first year seminar. I really enjoy this. And I also do it in my intro to honors course. A little bit different focus. That one is a look back, look forward. So how did they get to be an honor student? And then what do they think they need to be to be successful as an honor student? So it touches both. It allowed students to practice reflection prior to the ePortfolio and then create an artifact. It also served as that nice segue into the ePortfolio. And then in year 2, we did add, prior to the journey map, just a basic group discussion on reflective practices. So we asked, do you engage in everyday reflection? So do you journal? Do you do any type of mindfulness practice? So really kind of doing an inventory of, are you a reflective person? Because some people are and some people are not. So kind of a nice, just general class discussion about reflection in general. Because I think in one of the sessions yesterday, it was brought up that reflection can be kind of an icky word for students. We're going to ask you to reflect. Oh, okay. Some people may not like thinking about emotions and things like that. So I will stop sharing, and then I'm going to turn it over to Mark for our Jamboard.
Yeah, so if we revisit the Jamboard, and again, before we get to the next page, I appreciate the additions to it. The next thing we would like to ponder and have you ponder and contribute. And Rachel brings up a really good point about the words, right? Words matter. Reflection is awkward. One thing I want to add as we process into this next one is one of the other limitations of the original in 2011, if you remember the chart at the beginning of the electronic personal development plan, maybe for us, we understand it, that's pretty stilted for students. And that's not an intuitive practice. So the neat thing about this journey mapping, when students literally can put pen to paper and have graphic displays, is that that's very accessible. It's not intimidating. It's not stilted. It's not an uncomfortable. They get to express it in another way. Now, what I would like to ask us and to ponder, because we've all experienced this, if we've done journey mapping in whatever context you have, what have you found to be beneficial in this process for students? What have you found to be a point, an emphasis, a way that you coin it for the map? Or what have you found to be awkward? Because I think as we've all engaged in this, students may be secure in sharing some things, not secure in others, or if they do blurt something out, what are you going to do with that information? If you read it, and it might be a trauma aspect to it. So in the spirit of functional practice, we'd like you to kind of think out loud a little bit and post kind of your reactions to this element of the Jamboard. Yeah, identifying key points that can be reflected on. Absolutely, that brainstorming. And when you ask someone to think back, what are those? Is it a book? Is it a movie? Is it a life experience? Is it a positive experience? Is it a relationship? And as Rachel said, the way students would link an emotion to that can look a lot of different ways. It is inclusive. That's the element. That's the beauty of this with some of those reflective modes.
I can share one that I can add a little sticky note too, but some students will say, well, I haven't had any significant moments to put in my journey map. So then it's thinking that these moments have to be big moments. So I give an example that don't think just big experiences, think small. Maybe it's daily conversations with your neighbor. Maybe it's that one sticker that you put on your water bottle that really inspired you to go on to this major. So explaining that it's their journey and it's important, and to be able to look back and see that even though they weren't maybe big experiences, maybe you weren't captain of the football team, but maybe you were really important to someone one-on-one. So really thinking that it's all experiences.
Yeah, the pictures and descriptions blank, that may be too personal. Trauma always comes out. Yeah, translating pen to paper, it can be literally messy and hard to read for sure. Oh, absolutely. If you don't have a clear goal. Yep. Yeah, if it's just a standalone assignment without an end in mind. And that's where, as a faculty member, in tilting the assignments, as we heard about in another session, that comes into play huge. So if you find yourself in that space where you really resonate with, you don't know where you're going with it. Again, as Rachel mentioned in the beginning, and what we've done with ourselves over time is why. Why are we going to do this? And articulating that clearly in terms for students of why they're doing this. And as Rachel said, it doesn't have to be a big moment. It can be a standalone. It can be a string of moments. It can be an event. It can be something that, again, it doesn't have to be major. Tools, offering them tools to start again, take off some of the heat of the activity. Absolutely, right? Yeah, you could just have them brainstorm on any activity. And once they get pen to paper, you can be a little bit more intentional with the intent of this. Yeah, open-ended versus being too specific. Sure, failure, pain. Well, I think, if nothing, what our team has done in this space and with our students is we've showed them, scars and blemishes tell a story. And I've shared with my students every semester I do, and Rachel knows this one. I share it to first-year students that come in during orientation, that I failed out of college my first year, and I'm a chair of a department at a large metropolitan university. And sometimes, sometimes there's an audible gasp because everyone thinks everybody goes through life undefeated. I tell them I failed out. So that element of it, modeling, I think certainly helps, and showcasing that nobody is perfect, because that is intimidating for sure.
All right, before we move on, any questions about journey mapping, comments, thoughts before we dive into some personal reflection for you to create your own professional journey map? I'm gonna try and bring up the chat, make sure I didn't miss anything.
And as you're looking, Rachel, a couple of them that have popped up from the Jamboard, students with English as an additional language. I think that is awesome. Certainly that's going to try to honor that cultural nuance for the student there that may not have that. Also, asking students who have already gone through the course to provide advice for future students. That's awesome. You know, that passing of the baton is always a helpful, and that peer, and that's another thing we've done quite well in referencing having that peer element aspect to the e-portfolio overall.
When I first piloted Journey Maps, I piloted with my senior capstone course, and just completely organic. At the end, I said, if I have your permission, I would like to share your maps with the freshmen. And about half said, can we write them a note on the back? And I was like, absolutely. It was really cool. They wanted to give advice and kind of, you know, give them a little, we've been there, we know what you're going through. Your journey's probably going to be quite different than what you think it's going to be at this point. It was really awesome to see that. So I don't see anything in the chat. We are going to move into our journey mapping phase. So before we start this, I do want to make a point that reflecting on experiences can be difficult. So this may bring up memories that are unwanted, that are negative, that could be trauma. So it is up to you that you choose what you would like to reflect on. You do not have to reflect on everything. Also acknowledging that negative emotions are part of our story and who we are today. So that if you are able to reflect on some of those, it could be very meaningful to you. So what we're going to do is we are going to be going through 4 to 5 different steps. And I do have a time on this. I'm going to try to share audio, which will just be instrumental pop music for you all. So hopefully that works. But what the first step is to think back on all of your experiences that have led you to the professional that you are today. And the first step, take 5 minutes and just simply make a list of every experience or moment that stands out as meaningful, significant, or impactful in your professional journey. So I want you to think all the way back to childhood. For me, my first memory would be in 5th grade when I was required to go to Bradford Woods for 3 days. That stood out as something that was really awesome to me, and now directly ties to part of my job as a leadership development educator. And I teach at a different camp, also owned by IU, for students in leadership development. So think about what in your journey of your entire life has impacted you, the professional you are today. So we're going to take 5 minutes. I'm going to start my timer and I'm going to attempt to play some music. All right, so that was 5 minutes. I do want to acknowledge that you might still be making your list. That is fine. Or if you think of something along the way, you can always add it later. So a journey map is never finished. All right, step 2.
That is the key point right there. This is iterative by the day, hour, week, the month. Now there's 2 parts to the next one, and this is where we do the great thing about the first one. It's a brainstorm. They kind of come up with things. They don't have to have an organization. It's just whatever resonates with them that they recall. The second part gets a little bit more refined. The first phase of this, and this is where we elevate student choice, they get to decide what they include in this journey map. Now they have it out there. Do they want to share it? Is it a meaningful point? Is it fit with what they view and understand this assignment to yield? And then second, after that, after they come up with that list and choose the ones that they want to put on their eventual expression of a journey map, then it's time to maybe put a little bit of a chronological order to it. So there is a flow, because part of that reflection and that being a reflective practitioner is not that things have to always be that and linear makes sense. The first part was linear, did not matter. This part, it starts telling you about that journey and that pathway that highlights the anchor points. So the second step we'd like you to do, out of the list that you generated, what would you like to put up to graphically, visually represent your journey. And if you could try to find some order to it, chronologically speaking, if that makes sense, that would be awesome.
And I do play that music in class for students as well. So it's not just awkward silence for a really long time in class. And most students enjoy. I do say if you're someone who needs silence, let me know. And so I have had some, they go out in the hall. All right, next slide. So next step is a little bit more lengthy. We are going to give you 10 minutes for this. And what we're going to ask you to do is a 3-step process. You're going to, 1, briefly describe the experience and the moment. So if I was using that example of attending the camp, I would say Bradford Woods overnight camp for 5th graders. And then what was the takeaway from the experience or the moment? And for me, it was one of the first times that I felt 100% included in a group. So the way that the facilitators and the teachers at the camp included everybody was really the kind of eye-opening for me, how much I wasn't included at school and things like that. And I really enjoyed the way that they made that happen. So for me, that was the takeaway that I want to be an includer in my professional career. So if I were to assign an emoji to that, I might do like a light bulb, because it was like this idea for me that, oh, like, I don't want people to be excluded. I want people to be included. So take 10 minutes here. We'll hear 2 to 3 songs, briefly describe what was the takeaway, and then assign a feeling and emotion. And there's no length of how much you have to write for these. You can, again, I tend to do more emojis for emotions. I'm not really an emotions person, but I'd probably put happy, to that experience. So before we move on to our final step, which is creating your map, one thing I would love for you to do, oh, it's saying my internet connection's unstable. Can y'all still hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Can y'all hear me? Okay.
Yes.
Look back at what you have decided to include in your map and how you reflected on each experience. And is there a theme that you could pull out of the majority of your experiences? So there may or may not be, but I'm just curious, is there any type of theme that you could pull out? For example, with mine, it would probably be resilience. There was a lot of times in my life where people told me I could not do something. So maybe that's spite or, whatever that was. I was told I'm not prepared. I can't do that. So it was resilience, endurance, and grit that got me through a lot of my experiences, if that makes sense. There may or may not be a theme, but there might be encouragement from a mentor or a family member, whatever that might look like. So our final step.
Yeah, creating a map. And the only thing I would caution us on this is avoid that typical paradigm of a map. The definition of a map is a visual representation. That's it. A map doesn't mean beginning and an end per se. It could, but it's a visual representation. And this is the beauty of it for us, is this is where we get to see students' expressions in ways that maybe perhaps we might not have a thought about. And they own it. This is their agency. This is their time to tell the story. So we invite you during this time to create an artifact. And again, the beauty of this is an artifact that can be step 1 in entering something into a folio or portfolio or however we're thinking about it. So we would invite you to now allow your expressive side to generate a visual representation of this journey for you.
So I am going to stop sharing my screen and ask if anyone, doesn't have to be finished, could just have 1 or 2 things on there, but would anybody be willing to share your journey map that you created? As we're waiting for some brave people to share, let's go back to the Jamboard. So we have one more slide in the Jamboard. So we have the third one. If you click on over to the fourth, I'll turn it over to Mark for that part.
Yeah, now as we're deciding what you want to engage in, because this session is interactive about you, get ready to finish up and share your journey map or some iteration of it. Or we can start kind of, we'd love to learn your thoughts on this. How did it feel when you initiated step one of this journey mapping process? What are your thoughts? And if, express those quickly, if you don't mind, that'd be great to get it. Then more importantly is now that you feel a certain way about doing this, kind of process your position as an instructor, faculty member. What strategies could you use to support students in this process? Again, if you have reflection or e-portfolios as the end in mind, because there has to be an outcome for journey mapping. For us today, again, it was to explore with it, but also for you to reflect and start that reflective process. So we would ask you to share a little bit. What are your thoughts? What are some strategies? What worked? Was it awkward? Was it easy to get started? Was it hard to stop? Did you just have a big dump of information and then you had to sort it out? Or did you struggle to maybe get momentum? Did you think about big events? Did you go small moments? We just love to hear your thoughts, reactions, just to support each other in this pretty powerful activity once you get it rolling. And make no mistake about it, there's a risk in doing this as a faculty member if you're not, if you've not engaged in these activities before. But that's the beauty of excellence and teaching and SOTL work, taking that academic risk.
And I will say that it does bring up the trauma. So that's something that I always start each class with. And I share about CAPS, tell students CAPS is our on-campus counseling and psychological services unit. So I tell students, if this brings anything up, I will walk with you there, get you in touch with somebody that can help. And even I share personally for me, looking back on my journey, there's many moments that bring up very unwanted memories, and but it's part of my story. It's part of who I am today. So, and likewise, yeah, I see some comments coming in now. Love these.
Yeah, these
and
are
look at
awesome.
it, yeah, as a start, not a finish. Allows me to see the road and branching points, roads not taken, alternative paths. Absolutely. It's a great fit for self-awareness. Absolutely. Love the step-by-step work and guidance. I've had 3 separate careers. It was interesting exercise to find the connections between them. Very cool.
And as you're pondering this, the reason this was so intentional, and I default to Rachel on her leadership on this with our faculty team, we just modeled that you can do this in a class with your students like this. Not that any of us do this, but not that we always don't have to be the 50-minute voice in a class. You start giving students agency and you build the proper supports and you have the disposition of active learning. These are activities that'll stick with a student. It really will. And you'll get better at it as you go. No one's got to be perfect up front.
Right. But as Mark alluded to earlier, I think it's also important to share our journey with students as well. Not necessarily with a journey map, but just talking about your experiences. Because I think a journey map can be very personal. Even though I have students create this, I don't often see students put this in their e-portfolio because it is so personal. Awesome.
Yeah, these are great
awesome
reactions and observations. Yeah, these are fantastic.
Think we have around 6 minutes. So I will stop sharing. Would anyone be interested in sharing the map that they created? No worries if not.
I guess I could be brave. I'm not done,
Okay.
but I just
That's
started,
okay.
we have Pebble Pads, so I just
Yeah.
started throwing it in there. I can show
Absolutely.
you what
Yeah,
I
that'd
did
be
so
great.
far.
Yeah. I wouldn't expect anybody to be finished with the map. I allow students a 75 period to create their own map. So it's wonderful.
So I did have a career as an actor. Theater school was very
Nice.
seminal in that. Then I ended up a single parent, so I ended up teaching ESL in a government-funded English program with immigrant refugee students who are amazing, absolutely amazing. And I did end up bringing as much play into that learning as I could. And then I kind of got this is as far as I got. So when I did my graduate degree, and then now I've ended up, I actually don't used to work in that in our college, but now I work in ed tech and I support our portfolio platform. But anyway, I think there's definitely, it was an interesting activity because of the, finding these sort of connections between these three things that, kind of veered off in other directions and don't seem to be like have smooth linkages between them. So.
Oh, that's great. But you can still see the connection and pull from it. Yeah, absolutely.
And that's impressive in the time that we had that you
Yeah.
knocked this out. And thank you for sharing that. It's an awesome way to look at it. Really, that's fantastic.
Yeah. Would anyone else like to share?
I see a couple cameras just popped on. Anthony, Michael, maybe not. Okay.
Right. Well, I would love to end with another reflection. If you wouldn't mind going to the chat, and we're going to do a one-word reflection. You can only choose one word. It can be hyphenated, but what is one word reflection for this last hour and a half? So what is one word you would use to reflect on this experience? Thoughtful, practical, collaborative, meaningful, creative, fun, guided, inspirational, intense. Awesome. We'll keep those coming in. And any questions for us?
I'll ask one while the others think about questions they might have. So you talked about how this can be, challenging for students. Do you ever ask them how they plan to keep building the map after the activities that you've intended are finished, so that it's part of the way they look at the world and they keep adding to that map and all its permutations?
Yeah. So the way that I approach that in the first year is I tell them that their ePortfolio will be their living journey map that will evolve over time while they're at IUPUI. So I kind of transition from this one map to now you're going to use the ePortfolio to illustrate the time that you go through and the experiences that you have. So I don't necessarily go back to the map often. In the senior capstone, I do an abbreviated, kind of like I talked about earlier, but I don't necessarily go back to the journey map there. In the honors course, I would hope that advisors back and maybe talk about that, because there they are looking ahead to talk about experiences that they want to have. Well, thank you for spending an hour and a half with us. As the exercise scientist in me says, it is time for you to get up and stretch and move your body if you haven't. So I encourage that. It will help you stay focused. But going to hear now, I believe, from the student perspective.
Mm-hmm.